honored to be here to talk to all of you. My office is in Camarillo, right next to the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Camarillo. I'm really within half a block from there. So I have a lot of patients, including Dr. David Lowe, that he's also my children's pediatrician, so he's a member of the church in Camarillo. So I'm honored to be here. What I want to do tonight is talk a little bit about something that you can take with you and go home and probably impact someone profoundly. So I know the topic is sleep and dementia, and I will promise you I will touch base on that later on. But I want you to go home tonight and have something practical that you can use right away. So I want to share that with you, and if it's okay, I'll indulge you for about half an hour. And then after that, you can ask me any question related to sleep. Is that okay? Yeah. All right, let's do that. So let me see. Okay, so I'm going to talk about sleep apnea. So most of you have heard of sleep apnea, correct? Okay, good, yeah. So a lot of you think sleep apnea is a very bad form of snoring. Is that right? How many of you think that is the case? Well, yeah. So it is much more than that, unfortunately. So what I'd like to do is share with you some skills that you can take home tonight and actually diagnose someone with sleep apnea. Really, this is something that you can diagnose literally by talking and observing people. You don't need a sleep lab. You don't actually need a doctor. It is that simple. But there are some subtleties that I want to share with you too that even some doctors are not aware of. So let me see. How do we advance this? Oh, no. Well, not quite. Oh, good. So as a matter of disclosure, I'm in private practice. I'm a director of a sleep lab locally. I also have a teaching position at the UCLA VA clinic in West LA. That's where I trained, had my fellowship in pulmonary medicine. So sleep apnea, this is the typical thing, you see someone, who's like snoring loudly, waking up everybody in the household, even the neighbors down the street. This is what I call heroic snoring, right? So this is someone that actually you don't need to ask anybody. There's something wrong with his sleep, right? He snores, he gags, he chokes, makes a lot of noise during the night, and nobody can sleep because he's around. Okay, I'll have Phil do that. Okay, I'm not the only one. So I want to share with you several things. So sleep apnea is a very common condition, and also it's dangerous, and I'll show you some evidence to point to that. And also very easily recognized, but most important is treatable. Next, please. Okay, so just a matter of definition, I tell you this is the only definition you need to know. So sleep apnea, arbitrarily we define as holding your breath more than 10 seconds. And there's a thing called hypopnea, which is partially holding your breath with some oxygen drop. So for intensive purposes, we lump the two together because clinically they affect you in much about the same way. Next, please. So what is the prevalence of sleep apnea? Why are we worried about it? So you all heard of asthma. The incidence of asthma is about 4 to 5% in the United States. So if you look at the definition of sleep apnea, if you just count the times that people stop breathing, we define abnormal breathing in your sleep more than 5 times an hour as having mild sleep apnea. If you just look at that number alone, upwards of 20% of this study performed in 2000 show that you have 30 to 60 years old, and then you're over 20% of them will have some apnea. This is mainly in male. Female, the incidence is much lower. But if you couple that with daytime sleepiness, about 4% of these individuals, these are not people coming to the doctor. These are people working in factories. They just agreed to do a sleep study. And then when you take a history, they're sleepy. 4% of the male, 2% of the female. Now, thinking this is 20 years ago. So now, after 20 years, our population is older. We're also heavier. Both are risk factors for sleep apnea. So this is an representation of what's going on now. If you look at people more than 60 years old, the incidence of apnea among male and female at least double, if not triple, that number. So the incidence of sleep apnea is comparable to that of asthma. Next, please. So what is the problem with sleep apnea? Well, first of all, when you stop breathing, several things happen. You're not breathing, the oxygen is still being used up, so the oxygen in your blood drops. There's also a carbon dioxide, which is waste product from all the cells. And the idea of breathing is to expel carbon dioxide and bring in oxygen. Oxygen is fuel to your body. Oxygen comes in, it helps the engine run. So without oxygen, nothing in your body works very well. On the other hand, you can't get rid of the waste being carbon dioxide, your body also gets into trouble. So when you hold your breath, the waste product increases, the nutrients go down. That's trouble. So you have stress in your cardiovascular system, your blood pressure goes up, your heart races, all kinds of stress factors go into play. So when you're sleeping, instead of resting and recuperating, you're stressing yourself. In fact, it increases the risk of cardiovascular events, heart attack, stroke, increase in mortality, as well as morbidity. And also, it causes excessive daytime sleepiness. Why? Because you're not resting. You're constantly waking up, breathing. So the sleep that is normally restorative, making you feel better during the morning, now is the opposite. You wake up tired, like you've run a marathon. Next, please. So what happens when you're sleepy during the day? All kinds of bad things. Number one, you actually are more dangerous behind the wheels. When you're driving and you're not paying attention, well, guess what? You hit more bumps, and if there are cars around you, hit them. And then if you look at the number one reason why commercial truck driver has increased accidents rate is excessive daytime sleepiness. This is the number one. Not because of taking drugs, not because they had a stroke or heart attack while they're driving, it's because they're excessively sleepy. If you look at accidents at work, there are twofold increase in accidents at work when someone's sleepy on the job. If you look at job performance, obviously, especially if you're in front of a computer, screen, and you're sleepy, you're not paying attention, all kinds of things can go wrong. So depression, because you're not feeling rested, you're feeling tired all the time, you don't feel up. Your energy is down. You feel depressed. There's something wrong with you, and yet you don't know what it is. Family discord, if you have someone's constantly tired, not paying attention, you think the spouse would be happy? I doubt it, right? And the other thing is the quality of life. When you wake up feeling tired all the time, you can't pay attention, your job performance is poor, your quality of life goes down. So suffice to say, everything that happens to you during the day is affected one way or the other by how you sleep. Next, please. So what happened to motor vehicle accident? So if you look at this particular graph, if you combine alcohol intake with untreated sleep apnea, it's a very deadly combination. If you look at just sleep apnea alone, without drinking, your risk for having a car accident is about 4 times a normal person without sleep apnea. But if you drink on top of having untreated apnea, it goes up 10 times. So this is very, very dangerous. So most people, when they have sleep apnea that is not diagnosed, they don't think that they can drink and drive. But this is a slide that shows you how dangerous it can be. Next, please. So what happened to your heart? What happened to your brain when you have untreated sleep apnea? Well, the incidence of high blood pressure is a lot worse, is a lot higher. In fact, resistant hypertension, meaning when you take medicine, your blood pressure doesn't come down. That's one of the clues. If you have 2, 3, or 4 blood pressure medicine and still your blood pressure is not controlled and you snore, chances are you have been treated sleep apnea. And you have to treat the apnea to bring the blood pressure down. Otherwise, you can take all the medicine you want, you're still, trying to chase your tail. The other thing is cardiac arrhythmia. You all heard of atrial fibrillation? Atrial fibrillation is something that's very, very common. In fact, if you have uncontrolled atrial fibrillation, that is, you do all kinds of medications and the pulse rate is still very high, especially at night, there's a 90% chance you will have sleep apnea. So what happens is when you're struggling to breathe, when your heart rate goes up, it's because physiologically your brain is commanding your heart to pump. Imagine, if you will, your oxygen is low. Your brain needs oxygen, right? This is the only fuel that keep the brain cells alive. And the brain is the emperor, is the king of all the organ systems. So when the king is starving, it'll take blood away from anything, including your heart. So what it does is it commands your heart to pump fast, because the more blood that goes to the brain, the more oxygen can be extracted. However, keep in mind, the heart is not getting enough oxygen itself. So eventually, the heart will fibrillate, will have irregular heartbeat. And the atrial fibrillation sometimes can go into what we call ventricular fibrillation, which is a lot more dangerous, and people have what we call sudden death. So if someone dies in the middle of the night and they have ventricular fibrillation, there's a good chance that maybe sleep apnea plays a role. So that's a very, very important thing. The other thing is myocardial infarction, meaning that you have a heart attack. So statistically, if you have a heart attack between midnight and 6 o'clock in the morning, there's a 90% chance you will have untreated sleep apnea. Why is that? Well, because you are stressing your heart at the time that is most vulnerable. When you're sleeping, generally your breathing goes down. So your oxygen reserve is a bit lower. If you stop breathing altogether, guess what? Your oxygen reserve is only going to last you so long until you breathe again. If you have heart disease, that is, you have blockage in the arteries going to your heart, and you starve your heart of oxygen, what's going to happen? The area that had the least amount of oxygen, that is, the artery that is blocked, that area will be the most vulnerable. So a heart attack is simply death of the part of the heart because of lack of blood flow or lack of oxygen or both. So you can see why having sleep apnea is such a dangerous event, because it's not just one night. It's night after night after night for months and years. Eventually, something bad happens. So the other thing is congestive heart failure. If you have the heart pumping, trying to get blood to circulate, and yet at the same time, you have low oxygen, eventually something gives, right? The heart can try to pump more, but the muscles get weaker. Eventually, it cannot support the demands of the body. So the heart fails. Blood backs up to the lung, you got a short of breath, you wake up, you're in crisis. Again, heart failure is made worse when you have untreated apnea. Stroke, different organ system, same consequence. Low oxygen, you have blockage of artery going to the brain. Guess what? When you stop breathing, that area of the brain is vulnerable. So when you have brain cells that are ischemic or lack of oxygen, eventually you have death of those brain cells. That's what a stroke really is. Next, please. Okay, so this is an interesting graph. This is hard to read, but if you look at on the left-hand side is a study done in 2008 in Wisconsin by Terry Young. That one is done by Dr. Marshall in Australia, same year, 2008. So on the top, there are people who have different degree of sleep apnea. Some stop breathing 5 to 15 times an hour. Others stop breathing more than 30 times an hour. So the 30 times an hour, what we call severe apnea. So you can see there's a separation. As you go along what we call the x-axis, that is horizontally, going up 20 years. The people that have sleep apnea that is severe, their survival goes way down. There are 60% of the people who are not having apnea. So that means that a lot of these people die off. If you go on the right-hand side to see the Australian data, same thing. The worse your apnea, the more likely your mortality. Next, please. Okay, this is the reason. So most of these folks die because they are cardiovascular events. They either heart attack, or they have stroke, or they have heart failure. This is one of the big reasons why we're talking about sleep apnea. Because these folks that have severe apnea, if you don't recognize them, over time, they die off much faster. Next, please. Okay, so what are some of the risk factors? Obesity. So unfortunately, the bigger you are, the bigger your neck size, the more likely you're going to have sleep apnea. Increasing age, well, there's good and bad thing. It's good to grow old because you can grow old. However, if you get to a certain age, your risk for apnea goes up as well. Male gender, that's unfortunately the case. It has something to do with perhaps the sex hormone, testosterone. Anatomic, interesting. So the more narrow your throat, you have big tonsil, big tongue, your jaw is recessed. If you have all these things, it makes you more likely to have apnea. So sleep apnea is an anatomical problem. Okay? So the other thing is family history. So you have one first-degree blood relative with sleep apnea, your chance of having apnea yourself is doubled. If you have two first-degree blood relatives with sleep apnea, your chance is quadruple. 3 is 7 times. So might as well just go ahead and get a CPAP machine or something because you are likely to have it. So again, because we share genes among the families and the anatomical problem, if you have it, it's going to likely shared with your siblings or your parents. Alcohol. So when you drink alcohol, your muscles are more relaxed. And when you stop breathing, your brain is not likely to kick in and breathe. So that makes the apnea worse. Smoking, again, irritation of the throat, make the swelling worse, more likely to make the apnea worse. Other conditions such as low thyroid, acromegaly, all those things can increase the risk of sleep apnea. Next. Okay, so how do we diagnose it? This is why we're here. Because after this, you're all going to go home and look around you and see who you can pick up with sleep apnea, right? So this is the important part. Well, first of all, a lot of the men with sleep apnea will snore. Not all of them, but quite a few. In fact, the majority will snore. And sometimes they're what we call heroic snoring. This is when you snore, 2 doors down, you hear them, right? But also you're going to hear something unusual, which is gasping and choking. So they'll be snoring. They'll do something like that, right? And then well, I've been practicing. So the other thing is also when they snore, all of a sudden there's a long period of silence, right? There's a Sherlock Holmes story, right? Why didn't the dog bark? I think it was the Hounds of Bakersfield or something like that. So the idea is that when you stop breathing, that noise goes away. The noise comes when you have vibration of the soft tissue in the back of your throat. So that sound is what we call turbulence, is physics. But all of a sudden, when you don't have airflow, that sound goes away. Only at the end, it builds up to a crescendo, and then it opens up like a floodgate. And then usually the person shakes and then goes back to sleep. Now, when he or she wakes up in the morning, you ask them, they have no recollection. They're sleeping. So they say, what's the big deal? Unless you record them and you show them. And I have people that bring in the recording from their spouse or their children. Doc, that's what I did. So that's really, it's classic. When you see something like that, there can't be anything else but sleep apnea, right? And this is what we call obstructive apnea. Okay, so the bed partner is very important because frequently you ask the person who's involved, he or she will deny it. I never saw it. Of course not, you're sleeping. How could you see it? But the thing is, the pet partners or even the family down the hallway, they know it because they hear it every night. Unfortunately, sometimes they're brought to my attention after they have an adverse event, such as having a car accident. And then all of a sudden, they're here because the license is at stake and they want me to fix them so that they can get the license back, which is always actually helpful because it can save their lives. Not only the life of other people around them, but their own life as well. So personality changes. So when you are sleep deprived, sometimes you're what? Grumpy, right? You look at your grandkids. When they're sleep deprived, guess what? They have temper tantrums. Now, adults, we don't do that, although we can be real grumpy too. But you can be irritable. You sometimes actually can be forgetful because You're constantly sleepy. You're not paying attention. You can't remember things that are essential. Other thing is judgment. You can make very poor judgment because your brain doesn't work well. Your brain is constantly sleepy and oxygen deprived. Think of that. That's dangerous. And then if you look at some of the major accidents, 3 Mile Island, Beauport, all these happen in the morning when the operators are sleep deprived. They make poor judgment. They compound the bomb one after another. And then nuclear accident happen. Think of all that. So sleep deprivation is not trivial. It can be global. It can be catastrophic. Next, please. Okay, so how do we diagnose apnea? Very easy now. You can do it in a sleep lab, or you can even do it at home. So diagnosis is not a problem. And I just mentioned to you, recognition is not a problem. However, there's a subtle thing. In women, in ladies with sleep apnea, especially perimenopausal ladies, sometimes they don't act very obviously. Ladies with sleep apnea, number one, tends not to snore as loud as men. They're not moving around making noises. They're not waking everybody else in the house. But what they do is they wake up tired. They're forgetful. They may be depressed. Now, why does it happen to ladies around menopause? Turns out that estrogen is protective against sleep apnea. There's a high incidence of men to women with sleep apnea until the age of 50. And after that, ladies start catching up. So until about 65, there's still a preponderance of men to women with sleep apnea. After 65, the ratio is 1 to 1. So when estrogen falls, ladies have more sleep apnea. In fact, if you look at mortality of ladies, heart attack or cardiovascular diseases actually is more important even than breast cancer, especially after 65. And I think that a lot of time the ladies, their sleep apnea is missed. Now, this is no offense to gentlemen here, but usually when I see a patient, it's because the wife brings them in. Rarely I have the husband bring them in. So now the owners and all the men in the audience, pay attention to your spouse's breathing and sleep, especially when they wake up constantly tired and they're restless at night. Frequently it's because they have sleep apnea, but it's not that obvious to diagnose, at least just casual observation. Okay, so a sleep lab is like a hotel room. You know, it's not exactly very sterile, but you know, it's comfortable enough that hopefully most people go to sleep lab can have decent sleep. Next one. So what are some of the treatment? Well, losing weight helps because gaining weight makes the apnea worse for a variety of reasons. Increasing the amount of fatty deposition, increasing weight in the belly is harder for the diaphragm to move, so the oxygen reserve is a bit lower. Don't drink alcohol, especially close to bedtime. Don't drink these sedatives, anything that will relax the muscle or make it less likely for you to wake up when you stop breathing. When you're sleep deprived, you have more apnea. So avoid being too exhausted, avoid being too physically drained. That will actually make the apnea worse. Also, if you sleep on your back, because of the weight of the tongue fall back, it makes the apnea worse. Don't smoke. Smoking makes the throat more irritated or inflamed. Next, please. So when you lose weight, you should be able to reduce the incidence of apnea. But even if you had drastic weight loss, sometimes the apnea doesn't go away. Why? Because anatomically, you're not making a huge difference in the size of your tongue or the anatomy of your jaw, even if you lose a lot of weight. So another interesting thing, when you have sleep apnea, and if not treated properly, it's hard to lose weight. Why is that? Because there are hormones that control your appetite that actually go awry when you have untreated apnea. There's a hormone called ghrelin, which makes you feel hungry. Ghrelin goes up when you're sleep deprived, when you have untreated apnea. There's another hormone called leptin. It actually makes you feel satisfied when you eat. That goes down when you have sleep deprivation. So now you're in a pickle because you have your physiology constantly telling you you're hungry, you gotta eat, and when you eat, you don't feel satisfied. It's very hard to lose weight. Even if you lose weight, it's hard to sustain the weight loss because you're fighting your physiology. When you treat the apnea, you normalize these hormones balance, and your weight loss is much more sustainable. Okay, next. So there are some treatment. The treatment you heard of, CPAP machine, you all heard of it. It's been around for a while. It's been around since the mid-1980s. And treatment is a lot more comfortable now. It's a lot more available. There's also oral appliance, things you put in your mouth to move your jaw forward. When you do that, you keep the tongue from falling back and choking you. So that also works quite well. Next, please. So one of the graphic explanation is when you have apnea, your tongues fall back. You block the back of your airway. When you pressurize the airway, you essentially keep the tongue from falling back. That's an anatomical solution to an anatomical problem. Next, please. So what's the benefit of CPAP? This graph will show you. One on the top is people who are using the CPAP consistently 6 hours or more. Pretty flat line because they're still alive after 10 years. The ones on the bottom going down is the one that didn't use the CPAP. As obvious as that. So when you use your CPAP, you pretty much mitigate all the adverse effects of sleep apnea. And you keep going. So if you are compliant, that is, you use the CPAP machine all through the night, every night, it's as if you don't have the disease. Very, very few problems in medicine has a cure, quote unquote. If you stick with the treatment, it's like your life is not affected by this problem. So this is what's amazing about this slide. Next, please. Okay, so oral appliance again, I mentioned, something you put in the mouth. The dentist can do that. We have dentists that specialize in these things. There are some side effects. Sometimes they pull the jaw too far forward. There's some TMJ problem. But by and large, in skilled hands, this is avoidable. Next, please. Okay, so this is one of the newer inventions. It's called Inspire. It's a hypoglossal nerve stimulator. It's a pacemaker that you put on the chest wall. It connects to the nerve that supplies your tongue. So when you take a breath, your tongue goes forward. So these are drastic devices that for people who cannot use either the CPAP machine or the oral appliance. But again, they have significant apnea that needs to be taken care of. Next, please. Okay, surgery. Surgery is the last option, except if you're pediatric sleep apnea. So there are surgery that is essentially a roto-rooter at the back of your throat. There's surgery that actually pulls your tongue forward. This is a type of surgery that requires rearranging your entire face, breaking bones in your face and moving forward, rewiring them. But, you know, again, if you have no other option, that's your last-ditch effort. If you have pediatric sleep apnea, that is apnea in toddlers or apneas in 6 to 15-year-old, a lot of time they have big tonsils. If you remove the tonsils, the apnea gets much better. So their prognosis is different from adults. And I would submit it to you, sleep apnea affect children even more than adults. Children are growing, the brain is growing, they're going to school. When they keep waking up, when they get lack of oxygen, it has a profound effect on the behavior. In fact, a lot of the ADHD students, they probably have undiagnosed apnea as well. So look at these kids' sleep pattern as well as talking to them about how they behave during the day. So sleep apnea children don't actually fall asleep during the day because kids don't like to sleep. They like to be with people. They like to interact. So instead of actually obeying, staying in class, be a good student, they're very disruptive because that's how they stay awake. if they actually concentrate, they'll fall asleep. So they don't want to be made fun of. So instead they, kid around, they throw pieces of paper at other kids, they challenge the teacher. So at the end of the day, they are sent to the principal's office. But if you actually talk to them, they have terrible sleep. The parents didn't actually pay attention to find out. But pediatricians, now they're more clued into this. So if you have known kids who have ADHD, just ask a simple question. How does Johnny sleep? Just ask a few questions. You'll be amazed what turns out. And then you can get the diagnosis made and the right treatment. So, next. Again, I want to wrap it up. Sleep apnea is common, is dangerous, but it's easily recognizable. And also very treatable. So you're going to go home tonight and look around you. And if you find someone with apnea, have them go see their doctor. Get a sleep study. Get help. Okay, I'll stop here. I'll take questions. Yes.
Okay, hold it. Remember, this is being streamed, so please do not raise a question without a microphone in front of you. So right here.
I don't know how to use one of these things. Okay, I have AFib, and I was in the hospital with a heart failure. Do you think I should suggest to my doctor that I go and have the test done to see if I have the sleep apnea?
Especially when you wake up, you don't feel refreshed. Or if there's someone around you that said, oh yeah, your sleep is, very restless. And
I live alone, and I'm always tired.
Yeah,
I
think
want to
that would
sleep
be a
during
good
the
study.
day and, and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
So, okay,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I wake up maybe 2 to 3 times a night. I don't feel like I'm choking or anything, very rarely. Once in a while that'll happen, but do you usually wake up when you have sleep apnea, or do you not realize it?
Very good question. So obviously, in order to regain your breathing, you have to wake up, because otherwise you won't. So, but the question is, will you remember waking up? So we've done study, if you wake up and go back to sleep within 30 seconds, you will have no recollection. Problem is, when you wake up, you feel tired. Instead of being well-rested after spending 7, 8 hours in bed, you'll be tired, you'll be groggy, and you'll fall asleep during the middle of the day. You can actually get an app now pretty easily on your smartphone and record yourself. So if you make a lot of snoring noises, and all of a sudden you're very quiet, and you have a snort like I demonstrated, think apnea.
Hey, Doctor, Edwin Velarde here. I know that sleep apnea has a relationship with obesity, as well as diabetes has a relationship with obesity. Could you touch on a little bit on the relationship between apnea and diabetes?
Very good question. Absolutely wonderful question. So it's what we call a bidirectional influence. So keep in mind, when you stop breathing, your body is undergoing significant stress. You're choking and gagging yourself. So we have what we call a stress response. So this is the fight or flight phenomenon, right? So what happened is acute stress and the stress response is extremely important because it's life-saving. If you, say, 40,000 years ago, you're living in a cave and the saber-toothed tiger comes in. When you have the stress response, you get up, you fight or flight, right? You run away or you get your buddies to try to at least give the tiger a good fight. But if you have sleep apnea, you have chronic stress. You repeat this stress response 30, 40, 50 times an hour, all through the night. What does that do to your body? Well, first and foremost, a stress response requires a release of stress hormone. You heard about cortisol, you heard about adrenaline. So adrenaline make your heart race, make your blood pressure goes up, make your eye dilate. Also, it releases sugar from your liver. Because remember, when you have a stress response, you need nutrient, you need fuel. Where's the fuel coming from? Blood sugar. So now normally, blood sugar in our body goes up when we eat. However, when you have untreated apnea at night, it's like you're gorging yourself, but it's because of the stress of choking, of oxygen drop. So very high blood sugar, up and down, up and down. So now, the most common form of diabetes in the United States is type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes related to diet, to weight. Also, in this particular problem, untreated sleep apnea. So we think that in type 2 diabetes, we have a limited supply of insulin. So you want to hold on to the insulin as much as you can. So you will never be, quote unquote, a full-blown diabetic if you ever have what we call prediabetes. But if you are using all this insulin to bring the sugar down because your apnea is driving the sugar up during the night, you're going to convert yourself from a type 2 to a type 1 diabetic. It means that you require now insulin from the outside. So you need to inject yourself with insulin to keep the blood sugar under control, which brings a lot worse prognosis for your heart, for your kidney, for your eyes, and so on. So by treating the sleep apnea adequately, you actually reduce the risk of going from type 2 to type 1 diabetes or from prediabetes to type 2 diabetes, right? So that's a very, very good question. Also, we know that when you have uncontrolled diabetes, it causes something called diabetic neuropathy. It affects control the nerve of your muscles. And guess what? That makes the throat muscles more unstable. So you actually increase the risk of having apnea when you have worsening diabetic control. So it's bidirectional. It's a vicious cycle. The more diabetes, the worse the likelihood of apnea. The worse the apnea, the worse the blood sugar. So we need to stop that vicious cycle. Diagnose the apnea, treat it, and make it a lot easier to control diabetes going forward. Does that answer your question? Yes, thank you. You're welcome.
I was wondering if apnea brings on also dry mouth or allergy issues?
Okay, very good question too. So usually when you start breathing, one of the things that we do is we open our mouth. We tend to breathe through our mouth. Now, that said, a lot of folks with sleep apnea also have allergies. So their nose is clogged most of the day, and especially at night. So when you open your mouth, your jaw drop, your tongue fall back, make it more likely for you to have sleep apnea on top of this. So when you try to breathe through your mouth, it dries up your tongue, so you frequently wake up with dry mouth. So one of the things we tend to do is to treat any congestion or allergy you have involving your nose so you don't have to breathe through your mouth.
Doc, I was going to say something here to you as well. 7 years ago when you tested me, some of the indicators for me was, I was in severe obesity. I weighed 280 plus pounds. I had severe snoring, but there was one other factor, and I didn't hear you address this. This is another item that tipped off to me, was frequent urination in the night. Can you speak to that?
Sure. So this is a very good question. I frequently have male patients come to me and say, well, my prostate is not working well, so I have to get up 4 or 5 times during the night. Well, turns out they have sleep apnea as well, and when they treat the apnea, they don't get up hardly once or twice. So here's the reason why. When you are awake, your bladder holds about 150 cc or so of urine, and they say, okay, I have to go. When you're asleep, your brain actually allows the urine to accumulate because you want to sleep. You don't want to keep waking up, going to the bathroom. So a lot of time is when you wake up from one of these apneic episodes, you realize, oh, I got water in the bladder. I have to go to the bathroom. This is one reason. It's the waking up that makes you want to go, not because you have poor bladder control and so on. The second thing is also the lack of oxygen also inhibits the release of something called the antidiuretic hormone. So there's a hormone in the brain that naturally goes up when you sleep so that you don't produce as much urine. again, is the body way of allowing you to sleep. Now, I will go into why we sleep later because I think part of the talk is about dementia. But hold that thought for the time being. The third thing is also there's besides the antidiuretic hormone, there's another hormone produced from the heart. It's called atrial natriuretic peptide. And that also goes down when you have untreated apnea. And that also allows the water to go more freely to the kidney and produce more urine. When you treat the sleep apnea, all these abnormalities tend to go away, and you don't have to wake up so much anymore. So that's another sort of fringe benefit of treating apnea. You don't have to go to the bathroom all night long.
So, doctor, you mentioned dementia, and could you talk about the relationship of sleep issues to dementia and perhaps even Alzheimer's?
Right. So this is exciting news. This is sort of the cutting edge of neuroscience. In the last 7 years or so, there is discovery of a system in the brain called glymphatic. You heard of that? Okay, you heard of lymphatic, right? Lymphatic system is actually sort of the channel that collects all the waste from the body. So imagine now, any biological process is not 100% efficient. It's like a car. You put gas and you have exhaust fume coming out, right? So we have this exhaust fume collection system within the body. It is called lymphatics. Lymphatics go through just about every part of your body, collect all the waste from the kidneys, from the lung, from the heart, to bring it to the liver and process it, and also to the kidneys and pass it out. So we don't get poisoned by our own toxins. That makes sense? However, until 2012, we have not discovered a similar system in the brain. And that is sort of the biggest question. And then also, until then, we still couldn't answer the question why we sleep. If you ask me in 2011, I will give you the answer, we sleep because we're sleepy. This is a non sequitur kind of answer, right? But now we know. So Professor Macon Nedergaard from University of Rochester discovered through basic research. Now this is, I make a pitch for basic research because this is through animal studies. But from there, it's also translated to human studies. But without basic research, we wouldn't have found this. So she studied mice in their sleep versus awake. And she found that there is this lymphatic system in the brain that collects waste products, dispose of it, so that when you wake up, your brain is clean. So keep in mind, your brain produces waste every single minute that you are awake. When you and I are talking, you are processing information. Perhaps what I just mentioned to you in the last 5 minutes is really good stuff, right? So you want to remember that. So what you do is tonight, when you sleep, when you're in what we call your delta sleep, your deep sleep, this is the type of sleep babies get. Your brain is processing all this and retaining useful information and move it from a temporary storage area called hippocampus now to something called the prefrontal cortex. This is right here in the front of the brain. This is what makes humans different from other primates because we have this prefrontal cortex that can process information and also make correlation, empathy, interact with one another, be able to work as a group. This is different from some other animals. So from here, you retain the information for good, right? So this is what we call the permanent storage memory system. Now, when you have all this activity going on, the waste in the brain is actually kept in the brain. You can't be doing all of this and yet be able to dispose of the brain dispose of the waste at the same time. It's like when you're driving a car, you can't be doing car maintenance, right? So that's why we sleep. A third of our life is spent in sleep. One of the major reasons is to clean the brain. So when you are sleeping, your brain opens up by what we call the glial cells. These are the gatekeeper cells. That's why we call it glymphatic. It's lymphatic with a G in front. So these glial cells open up, the cerebral spinal fluid goes in. It's like you have a dirty driveway, you're hosing it down. This CSF goes in, washes all the toxin out. When you wake up, your brain is good to go. Now, what are these toxins? One of them you may have heard of. It's called amyloid beta protein. Amyloid beta protein is what we found in patients with Alzheimer's disease. So Alzheimer's disease has these things called senile plaques. And then something called neurofibrillary tangles. These are all proteins, waste product in the brain that is not gotten rid of. So perhaps Alzheimer's disease is a problem with waste disposal. And your sleep is the biggest waste disposal system that we have. So when you sleep well, when you sleep enough, you're cleaning your brain. When you wake up, you're at your peak. You are fresh. Your memory is good because you just store the ones that are important to you, get rid of the ones that are not important. You also, in your REM sleep, when you're dreaming, you have free association, you have insights, you get imagination, and also you get what we call empathy. Now you understand why people are the way they are. They've done studies where they take patients with normal sleep, and every time they go into dream sleep, they wake them up. And at the end of that, they show them pictures of people's faces. And they ask them, is this person happy? Person sad? Is this person, indifferent? Guess what? When your REM sleep is disrupted, you get a lot of those wrong. What does that mean? Well, so when you sleep poorly and you work in an office and people come up and talk to you, you're not reading their signals well. You're not being able to directly relate to them. And you're actually having trouble with interpersonal relationship. So maybe perhaps some of the people that take shotguns to their office, maybe they have some sleep issues and interpersonal relationship problems. So having good sleep, having a way to get your sleep in good order, not only does it help you, but it helps everybody around you as well.